Hey, everybody. Ready for a deep dive into something pretty fascinating?
Always.
Today, we're tackling geopolitics.
Ooh, exciting.
I know, right? Specifically, we're going to be talking about how geography shapes global power, and we're going deep with this book by Peter Zeihan called Accidental Superpower.
Great book.
It is a great book, so if you are listening right now, you might be, prepping for a meeting or boning up on your geopolitics or just insanely curious.
Always good to be curious.
But get this.
Okay.
Zeihan himself admits that this book's conclusions totally challenged his own deeply held beliefs.
Really?
Yeah, so we're talking, this guy is, green internationalist libertarian.
Wow.
And the data that he was looking at for this book took him in a totally different direction.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So what did he find? What's the big takeaway?
Well, he really unpacks this whole idea of the U.S. as an accidental superpower.
Okay.
So he's basically arguing that America's global dominance wasn't part of some master plan. It was just a result of its unique geographic advantages.
Huh. Like they won the geographic lottery.
Yeah, exactly. But before we get to America's accidental rise, let's back up a little bit. Can you give us a crash course on why geography matters so much in the grand scheme of things?
Sure. I mean, think about it this way.
Yeah.
Imagine you are living in ancient Egypt,
Okay.
where the Nile River floods predictably every year.
Yeah.
That means fertile land, right?
Right.
Surplus crops,
Okay.
but also centralized control. Because the state basically holds the keys to the most valuable resource, water.
Right.
And Zeihan argues that this geographic advantage led to mass slavery.
Wow.
Which, kind of shows how location can shape destinies in both positive and, in this case, horrifying ways.
Yeah, I mean, it makes you realize how much we take for granted.
Totally.
The climate that we live in or
Yeah.
the food that we eat, these things aren't universal.
No.
And they have huge implications for how societies develop.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, when you look at how civilizations have historically interacted, one thing becomes crystal clear. Water transport is king.
Oh, okay.
And it's not even a close competition.
Yeah, I'm picturing those massive container ships, hauling goods across the ocean.
Yes.
Definitely seems more efficient than a caravan of camels or something.
Way more efficient. Zeihan, he crunches the numbers in the book.
Okay.
And it's mind-blowing. Shipping a container across the ocean costs about 17 cents per container mile. Trucking it over land, $2.40.
That's over 14 times more expensive.
It is.
I mean, suddenly my Amazon Prime deliveries are looking a lot more complex.
Right. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. When you factor in the cost of infrastructure,
Okay.
roads, bridges, tunnels, you name it,
Yeah.
that ratio explodes to 40 to 1 or even 70 to 1.
Wow.
Which explains why civilizations like Egypt,
Right.
Mesopotamia, even ancient Rome,
Yeah.
they all rose near navigable rivers or coastlines.
Yeah.
Control of the seas translates to economic power even today.
So looking back in history, those who mastered water transport had a serious leg up.
100%.
Yeah.
Think about the 16th century,
Okay.
Spain and Portugal. They emerge as global powerhouses thanks to these key maritime innovations.
Okay.
The compass allowed for much more accurate navigation, even in rough seas.
Right.
And then you've got the gun port.
The what?
The gun port.
So we're not talking about fancy windows on ships.
Not at all. Gun ports were these openings in the hull of a ship that allowed cannons to be mounted below deck.
Oh.
This meant more firepower,
Right.
better stability,
Okay.
and the ability to strategically position those cannons for maximum impact.
Yeah.
Essentially, they turned ships into floating fortresses.
I'm guessing this had major implications for the balance of power back then.
Oh, you bet.
Ugh.
Spain, with its newly fortified navy, was able to challenge the mighty Ottoman Empire,
Wow.
gaining access to vast resources in the Americas. And Portugal, though smaller, they used these innovations to control the spice trade in Asia, directly impacting the Ottomans' economic lifeline.
It's amazing how a seemingly small technological advancement can completely reshape the global landscape.
Right.
But even with these innovations, empires don't last forever, do they?
Exactly. And that's a key point that Zeihan makes.
Right.
Technology, unlike geography,
Yeah.
is constantly evolving and diffusing.
Right.
So the English, masters of the treacherous North Sea, they eventually adopted and improved upon these deep water technologies,
Okay.
leading to the rise of the British Empire.
Of course.
It's almost poetic. The the rise and fall of empires driven by this constant technological leapfrog.
So if we apply that logic to today, who are the Englands of the 21st century? Who's poised to inherit the advantages of our current technology?
That is the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
But before we jump to the future,
Okay.
let's consider how a landlocked country like Germany navigated the rise of maritime power. I mean, they weren't exactly blessed with the same geographic advantages as, say, Spain or England.
So how did Germany, without easy access to the sea, become such a powerhouse?
Well, Zeihan argues that their geography, while challenging,
Yeah.
forced them to develop incredible efficiency.
Okay.
Think strong local governments,
Uh-huh.
a centralized approach to capital capture,
Right.
channeling savings into strategic investments.
So they couldn't rely on the sea.
Right.
So they had to optimize everything else.
Exactly. And that brings us to another key point.
Okay.
Industrialization played out differently in every country
Yeah.
because of its unique geography.
That makes sense.
In Germany,
Yeah.
it happened everywhere,
Okay.
not just in the capital.
Right.
They had this existing infrastructure and skilled local governance,
Yeah.
meaning they could industrialize on a much wider scale.
Okay.
Contrast that with England,
Yeah.
where industrialization was heavily concentrated around London.
Right. So different geographies.
Yes. Different paths to power.
Exactly.
This is all building towards the accidental superpower idea, right?
It is.
So where does the United States enter the picture?
With a bang.
Right.
And a winning hand dealt by geography. They inherited vast, fertile land for a steal.
Yeah.
Think temperate climate,
Right.
abundant resources,
Okay.
those all important navigable rivers.
Uh-huh.
They also had natural barriers separating them from potential rivals like Canada and Mexico.
So they had the best of both worlds.
Yes.
Prime real estate for deep water navigation and industrialization.
It was a recipe for success.
Yeah.
Their internal waterways facilitated trade and unity,
Uh-huh.
unlike Germany, which needed expensive infrastructure projects to connect its regions.
Right.
And those natural defenses meant they were virtually immune to invasion,
Okay.
unlike England or Japan.
So this allowed the U.S. to just focus on development and economic growth
Yes.
without the constant threat of war.
Okay, they clearly hit the geographic jackpot. But they weren't always the global powerhouse they are today, right?
No.
When did that shift from isolationist to major player on the world stage happen?
Well, that shift happened gradually, but by the turn of the 20th century, their industrial might and strategic position made them impossible to ignore.
Yeah.
Think about the Spanish-American War,
Uh-huh.
the open-door policy with China,
Right.
the rise of U.S. naval power.
Okay.
All of these signaled America's growing influence on the world stage.
Okay.
But there's another piece of this puzzle that we haven't talked about yet.
Okay, what's that?
Demographics.
Okay, so we've covered how geography shapes power.
Right.
But how do demographics,
Yeah.
the study of populations,
Uh-huh.
how does that play into all of this?
It's like the hidden engine driving history.
Okay.
It determines who's working, who's consuming, who's investing, and ultimately who's calling the shots.
Okay, I like that.
Think of it this way.
Okay.
Younger workers are typically borrowers. They're starting families, buying houses, investing in their careers,
Right.
all of which requires capital.
Yeah, that makes sense. They're at the beginning of their earning journey.
Right now, mature workers, those in their 40s and 50s, they're the savers.
Okay.
They've paid off some debt. Maybe their kids are out of college and they're putting money away for retirement.
Right.
They're the ones generating the capital that keeps the system running.
So you're saying a country with a lot of mature workers will have more capital available
Yes.
for investments, for growth?
Exactly. And this is where things get interesting.
Okay.
Every country goes through demographic shifts.
Right.
Baby booms, busts, aging populations.
Yeah. Yeah.
And those shifts have a huge impact on their economic and political stability.
So this is where the U.S. baby boomer generation comes in, right?
It is.
They're retiring en masse, aren't they?
They are, and this is creating a potential capital crunch.
Okay.
Remember, the boomers were the biggest generation in U.S. history, and they were the primary source of capital for decades.
Right.
As they retire, there's simply not enough capital to go around to fund everything. Government programs, investments, consumer spending.
But Zeihan also points out that the U.S. is unique in this demographic equation, right?
Yes.
Something about millennials.
Right. Again, the U.S. might have a built-in advantage here.
Okay.
Generation Y,
Yeah.
the millennials, They are actually larger than Generation X.
Really?
So as they enter their prime earning and saving years,
Yeah.
they have the potential to replenish that capital pool.
So while other developed countries are facing a demographic cliff, the U.S. might actually pull through.
What's possible?
But hold on, what about the energy picture? We talked about oil being crucial for global power.
Right.
But isn't that going to be less important as renewable energy takes over?
That's where things get really interesting because while the long-term transition away from fossil fuels is inevitable,
Right.
the short term is being completely upended by a technological revolution. Fracking.
Fracking. I know it's a big deal,
It is.
but honestly, I need a refresher.
Okay.
Why does it matter so much in this context?
Think of it this way.
Okay.
Fracking unlocks these vast oil and natural gas reserves
Yeah.
that were previously inaccessible,
Right.
trapped in shale rock formations.
Okay.
This has allowed the U.S. to go from being a major oil importer
Right.
to the world's largest energy producer,
Wow.
pumping out more oil than Saudi Arabia
Really?
and more natural gas than Russia.
So this shale boom is a total game changer for the global energy landscape.
It is
What are the implications, especially for the U.S.?
huge,
Okay.
both economically and geopolitically.
Okay.
First, it means the U.S. is becoming increasingly energy independent,
Right.
reducing their reliance on imports from unstable regions.
So less dependence on the Middle East.
Yes.
Does that mean they're going to disengage from that region altogether?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it ties back to Bretton Woods, the post-WWII system that Zeihan argues is becoming too expensive for the U.S. to maintain.
Okay, remind me what Bretton Woods was all about.
Sure. So after World War II, the U.S., with its economic and military, might essentially set the rules for the global order.
Okay, yeah.
Bretton Woods established a system of fixed exchange rates, promoted free trade,
Okay.
and created institutions like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. This system has brought decades of prosperity and relative peace.
Right.
But as Zeihan points out,
Yeah.
it's been a costly endeavor for the U.S. to uphold.
So with the U.S. becoming more energy independent
Yes.
and facing these demographic challenges, Zeihan is suggesting they might decide to step back from their global role as the world's policeman.
That's exactly his argument.
Really?
He predicts the U.S. will become more isolationist, focusing on its own economic interests and regional security.
Okay.
They won't necessarily abandon their allies, but they'll be less willing to shoulder the burden of global leadership.
That sounds pretty unsettling.
It could be.
What happens to the world if the U.S. steps back? Who fills that void?
Zeihan paints a picture of a more chaotic world
Okay.
where regional powers vie for dominance.
Right.
Trade routes become less secure,
Yeah.
and conflicts could erupt in areas where the U.S. has traditionally kept the peace.
So a potential return to a more every country for itself kind of world?
Potentially.
It sounds like something out of a dystopian novel.
It's not necessarily all doom and gloom.
Okay.
Zeihan argues that some countries are actually well-positioned to thrive in this new environment.
Yeah, okay.
He divides the world into 6 categories, ranging from state failures to rising stars to aggressive powers.
Interesting.
And some of the countries he highlights might surprise you.
All right, so who are the winners and losers in this post-American world?
Well, let's break down these categories and see what the future might hold. Okay, so let's start with those state failures.
Okay, so who does Zeihan see as, like, in real trouble if the U.S. does, like, step back from the global stage?
Well, he paints a pretty bleak picture for countries like Syria, Greece, Libya, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Yemen.
So basically, countries that are already struggling with, like, you know, political instability, economic woes, or maybe a lack of strong national identity.
Exactly. These countries are heavily reliant on the current global system. Whether it's for security guarantees, economic aid, or access to trade.
Right.
And if that system weakens, they'll be extremely vulnerable to internal strife, economic collapse, or even takeover by their neighbors.
Yeah, it makes you think about how globalization, while connecting the world in many positive ways, it's also created a lot of interdependence.
For sure.
And when that support system crumbles, some countries are going to be left high and dry.
Yeah.
But, okay, on a more optimistic note.
Okay.
Who are Zeihan's rising stars?
All right.
Which countries does he see as being poised to thrive in this new world order?
This is where it gets interesting. He puts the U.S., surprisingly, in this category. Along with Australia, Argentina, Angola, Turkey, Indonesia, and Uzbekistan.
hold on. The U.S. is a rising star. I thought we were talking about them, like, becoming more isolationist, stepping back from their global role.
They are.
Yeah.
But Zeihan argues that even with a more inward focus,
Okay.
there are geographic advantages, energy independence,
Uh-huh.
and that demographic resilience we talked about
Right.
will allow them to weather the storm better than most.
Okay.
Think of it as a rising star in a world where the bar has been lowered
Right.
and the competition is scrambling.
Okay. That's a fascinating perspective. What about the other countries in this rising star category? What are their unique strengths?
Take Australia, for example.
Like-
They've got abundant resources, a
Yeah.
strong economy,
Uh-huh.
and they're geographically isolated from major conflict zones.
Yeah. They've always been known as the lucky country.
Right.
It seems like that luck might continue.
It might. And then there's Argentina. Zeihan believes they'll benefit from their agricultural potential,
Right.
especially as climate change disrupts food production in other parts of the world.
So they could become the breadbasket for a hungry planet.
Potentially, of course, they'll need to overcome their history of political and economic instability to realize that potential.
Yeah.
But now let's move on to the category that I think will really pique your interest. The aggressive powers.
Okay, I'm all ears. Who are these ambitious troublemakers and what makes them tick?
These are the countries most likely to make headlines, for better or for worse.
Okay.
Zeihan includes Germany, Japan, Uzbekistan, Saudi Arabia,
Mm-hmm.
Russia, Turkey, and Angola in this group.
Okay.
They all have their own unique motivations and challenges,
Right.
but they share a common desire to expand their influence in this new world order.
That's quite a mix of countries. What are some of the specific factors that might drive their assertiveness?
Well, for starters, Germany is going to be facing a serious energy crunch.
Okay.
As Russia, their main gas supplier,
Yeah.
becomes less reliable. They might be tempted to flex their economic muscle,
Right.
or even their military,
Okay.
to secure access to those vital resources.
So a nice Germany might be a thing of the past.
It's possible.
Yeah.
Then there's Japan, which, like Germany, is heavily dependent on imports.
Yeah.
But unlike Germany,
Uh-huh.
they've got a powerful navy
Okay.
and might be more willing to use it to protect their interests.
So we could see a more assertive Japan on the world stage. That would definitely be a shift from their traditional pacifist stance.
It would be. And then, of course, there's Russia.
Right.
They've already demonstrated their willingness to use military force with the annexation of Crimea.
Yeah.
As their economy weakens and their population ages, they might become even more aggressive in their attempts to maintain their regional dominance.
It sounds like a recipe for conflict, especially in Eastern Europe. What about Saudi Arabia?
Yeah.
They've been a major player in the Middle East for decades.
Right.
How do they fit into this new landscape?
Well, they're facing a double whammy of declining oil demand and internal instability.
Right.
This could make them more prone to lashing out,
Yeah.
either militarily or through proxy conflicts,
Okay.
to try to maintain your grip on power.
Yeah, a desperate Saudi Arabia is not something anyone wants to see.
It's not, but there's one major player we haven't talked about yet,
Okay, who's that?
China.
Right, of course, China, the economic powerhouse of the 21st century. Where do they fit into all of this?
And here's the real shocker. Zeihan doesn't see China as a long-term winner in this new world order.
Wow. Okay.
In fact, he predicts they'll face a series of crises that will ultimately lead to their decline.
Wait, seriously. China, the economic juggernaut, is going to implode.
Yeah.
What's his reasoning behind such a bold prediction?
He points to their economic growth,
Okay.
which has been fueled by debt and exports.
Right.
Unsustainable as global demand weakens and their population ages.
Okay.
Then there's that demographic time bomb created by the one-child policy,
Yeah.
a rapidly aging population, and a shrinking workforce.
So they're running out of workers and consumers at the same time.
Exactly. And let's not forget their political system,
Okay.
which is highly centralized
Uh-huh.
and relies on economic growth to maintain legitimacy.
Right.
If that growth falters, social unrest could erupt.
It's mind-boggling to think about a world where China isn't a dominant force. But if Zeihan is right, what are the potential consequences of their decline?
He envisions a wave of migration
Okay.
as people flee economic hardship or political instability,
Right.
with many heading towards the U.S.,
Okay.
which, despite its isolationist stance, will still be seen as a beacon of opportunity.
So the U.S., while trying to disengage from the world,
Yeah,
might end up dealing with a migrant crisis.
That's the irony.
Wow.
China's decline could also create a power vacuum in Asia,
Right.
leading to increased competition between regional powers like Japan, India, and Russia,
Yeah.
a recipe for conflict in an already volatile region.
And on top of all that, we have climate change, which we haven't even fully addressed. How does that factor into Zeihan's predictions?
He acknowledges climate change,
Okay.
but his book focuses primarily on the interplay of geopolitics and demographics.
Right.
However, he does believe that the U.S., due to its geographic diversity and agricultural capacity,
Okay.
is well positioned to withstand the effects of climate change better than most.
So even in a climate change world, the U.S. might still have a leg up. It's a lot to take in, but you've given me a whole new way of looking at the world and the forces shaping our future. To our listeners out there, I highly recommend diving into Zeihan's book
Yes.
and forming your own conclusions. It's a wild ride, but it will challenge your assumptions
I agree.
and maybe even help you make sense of the headlines.
It's all about understanding the interconnectedness of geography, demographics, technology, and how these factors shape the global landscape.
Absolutely.
We're all part of this unfolding story, and the choices we make, both individually and collectively, will determine what the future holds.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'd like to leave you with a final thought. If the U.S. does step back from its global role, what responsibility do other countries have to step up, especially those with the resources and capabilities? Who will be the new guarantors of stability, and what price are they willing to pay? These are the questions that will define the next chapter of human history, and it's up to all of us to engage in this conversation and shape the world we want to live in. Thanks for joining us on this fascinating journey. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep exploring the world around you.